As I've evolved from my humble beginnings, I've had the opportunity to be in a lot of rooms. The more people I've met, the more stories I've learned. Stories of passion, trauma, triumph, and resilience. These are the stories that inspire us, that remind us of the human spirit. We can all learn from the untold stories in each of us, regardless of where you come from. And now, I'm excited to share these stories with you. This is Epic Conversations.
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. There's probably going to be some Equinix people that are going to be coming in because we like to be a little bit late to things. But I'm super excited to have everybody here, the partners that also joined from the local tech companies that also sponsor Pivotal. We are super excited. Last year, we actually chose Pivotal as our grantee winner across the We Are Equinix Bay Area, and I am one of the leads here, and I'm also part of our revenue operations department within Equinix. But I'm super excited to be here with Teresa, really recording this amazing podcast with amazing speakers, and Matt Bell, who's the CEO at Pivotal, who's going to share a little bit more about the organization.
Thank you. Thank you, Tasha, and thank you, Patty, for having us today, and everyone at Equinix. Thank you for your partnership and for being here today. Really excited to be conducting these podcasts here. There have been two already earlier today that Dell has conducted. She's still hanging in there really strong. And we've got a third one that's going to be, I'm sure, really amazing, just as the other two are. Just some quick housekeeping things. Always promoting Pivotal. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, you can do that on our website or at the table when you go. And there are a lot of ways to get involved. Next week, we're going to talk about this at the end of the podcast today, but there's a great opportunity to partner with us on the video career clips that we're producing, and we're going to talk a lot more about that a little bit later. But I would love to just get out of the way and turn it over to Teresa White. Del runs, as you can see, the Everyday People, Extraordinary Circumstances Epic Conversations podcast series. She's been a longtime partner of ours, former coach at Pivotal, and just an incredible social impact leader who is really fighting for educational equity, racial and socioeconomic justice, and she does this through education and storytelling. So without further ado, Del, please take it away.
So I am really excited to be here again. I want to thank everybody that is in the room. I'm the host of Epic Conversations, Everyday People, Extraordinary Circumstances. And we tell human stories of passion, trauma, triumph, and resilience. And part of why I started this series was because I would just end up in these random places. And I'm like, how did I end up here? And I started thinking about all the stories and the people that I would meet in different circumstances. And then my life started to feel a bit like a movie. So I was like, I gotta start talking to people and like actually documenting these stories. I grew up in the foster care system for as long as I can remember. I literally don't even remember the age I entered the foster care system. And I emancipated out of the foster care system after my first semester in college. I graduated high school at 17. I went to school in Greensboro, North Carolina. And so because I was 17 and out of high school, you're still in care until you age out. And at the time, 18 was the age out. That was the time that you get cut off from the system. And the following year, so my birthday's in December, right? So December of 2013 was when I aged out. And then January of 2009. December of 2009 was when I aged out. January of 2010 was when they had extended foster care. So I missed it by like the literal hairs of my chinny, literally days. But for me, going to college was really was what kind of was a buffer for me, right? Because I got to live on campus. I attended Bennett College, the oldest historically Black college for women. And so I was in a community of Black women. It's where I've emerged into the person that most people know me to be now. I always say Bennett and teaching really evolved me in really unique ways. And I think having that as a landing place for me created a whole, like, just opened up a whole other pathway in terms of like my self-sufficiency. And so when I got connected with Pivotal, I was leaving the classroom. I just moved back to California. I taught in Miami-Dade. And Pivotal came at a transitional time. And for me, that was like one of the ways that I gave back, but I learned so much from the people that I was supporting at Pivotal, because I worked with really high needs young people in care. And even though we had a similar in care, we had foster care in common, our experiences in foster care were very different. And so I use this platform as an opportunity to elevate voices like Marilyn and Teresa's and Mac, who was here earlier today, and Dazzy and Danaja. And you all will have opportunity to see that in post-production as well. So I thank you all for being a part of this magical experience, okay? And thank you again to Equinix for having us. So with that, we're gonna jump into some topics, okay? So first, I wanna introduce Marilyn Travis. Marilyn is a Bay Area educator with 6 years of teaching experience in Bay Area charter schools, including East Palo Alto Academy. She is a fierce advocate for young people, Latinx women, and she mentors aspiring educators through programs like Stanford Teacher Education Program, the STEP program, for those who are familiar. And she engages in professional development through initiatives like Intercambio and the Holyoke Fellowship, driving her growth towards national board certification. Marilyn is also an alum of the Stanford University. So welcome, Marilyn. And clap it up for her. We have Teresa Gamboa. She is a Pivotal alum. Teresa, her family was a victim of the war on drugs. We share that in common. If you are a friend of Pivotal, if you've been involved with Pivotal, you know that I talk about that a lot, being a victim of the war on drugs, which is a whole other side. So we'll get into that. She graduated high school at 16 years old. She graduated from SF State with a business degree in 2021 and did internships through Pivotal, which led to her career. And so Teresa is a B2B marketing professional, and she's passionate about sharing her journey and encouraging other people to rise to their fullest potential, regardless of the circumstances that they're facing. So thank you for being here as well.
Yeah.
Let's clap it up. So I want to first start this conversation by helping people understand what you were like as a child. What was your childhood like? And how did you arrive at the foster care system?
Mm-hmm.
Anyone of you could start.
Okay, I can go first. So my childhood was, it was different compared to a lot of people. I grew up with, my father is a gang member. And so, you know, being raised by a gangster, you kind of are wired differently growing up. You see things differently. You are raised differently. And so my childhood was different, to say the very least. And then you mentioned...
Maybe elaborate more on what you mean by different.
Yeah. So for example, like if there was ever any like issues at school, my dad wouldn't want to hear me complain about like the issues. He'd like want me to go and like set it straight. Like, yeah, and he's like, you better not come home complaining about that or you're gonna get it. And so I was wired different. I was wired to like kind of do the same thing as him, to like install intimidation in people and like, you know, perhaps get into a fight here or there. And just kind of seeing how people respected my dad in the streets. Anytime I like ran across people, they'd be like, oh, that's your dad? Oh man. And then they'd like kind of just give me a bunch of respect and be like, he's a good dude. But yeah, like anywhere I went whenever I was with my father growing up, anywhere I went, he'd know someone. And then like, you know, it's just like crazy. Like I can be on a completely different side of town and like someone will like come and talk to him. And so like he was very, very known in the streets and like very respected, you know, so yeah.
You have siblings?
I do. I have 3 siblings. I have 1 twin sister and 2 older sisters.
Okay. And what was that like growing up in the household with, and your mother, was she in the picture as well?
Yeah, my mom was in the picture.
Okay.
She was like, you know, just a yes woman, like whatever my dad wanted. So like, yeah, like she went along with everything that he, like any decision he wanted to make, she fully supported. So yeah, I grew up with, yeah, twin sister, and you know, the house, it's like growing up with a twin is super different because I had like a best friend, you know. I had one person that was with me through everything and like saw all the things I saw. And like, you know, my dad, he was a victim of the war on drugs. Well, my family was actually a victim of the war on drugs. And that's what eventually led to like this crash, right? Like a house of cards just tumbling down. That's what led to it was the drugs. Drugs affect your life. They affect everyone around you, and they can destroy your family. They can destroy your opportunities. Every little thing that you have in life, it affects, you know? And so, yeah, it's just really interesting, right? Growing up.
And then the follow up to that is how did you end up in the foster care system? What was the trajectory there? So I'm assuming some version of the war on drugs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Started that whole thing.
Yeah. Well, my father, you know, well, the beautiful thing about this podcast is that like I get to tell my story the way I want to tell it. I don't need to let someone narrate it for me. I know what happened, you know? And like my father was a victim. Was I a victim of being in the foster system? Yeah, I was a victim of a lot of things, but ultimately at the end of the day, what started that was the war on drugs that affected my family. And it just tumbled down to every little area, every area of his life, every area of anyone that was connected to him. His mother felt the pain of seeing her son, you know, battling with an addiction that most people, like, you can try and like, you know, you can try and be like, oh, well, he should have done this, but most people don't understand what it's like to cope with an addiction. Most people don't know. And at the end of the day, the war on drugs affected Black and brown communities so heavily, you know? And so I give my father grace because I love him. Like right now, I'm trying to restore that relationship. It's something that, like I said, I get to tell my story. I don't need to let anyone make him seem like the big bad wolf. Ultimately, he was his own victim to a lot of things. And that led to my parents making really poor choices, you know? But so yeah, I ended up in the foster system due to abuse, like physical abuse. And so there was one day that I got so bad that I looked unrecognizable, and that was the day that I put my foot down. And that was the day that I called the cops. I made the decision to open my mouth. And the moment I opened my mouth, they're like, you know, you're not gonna go back. Like, it's never gonna be the same. You're not going back home. And so, you know, I was taken immediately as soon as I opened my mouth and made a police report of what happened.
Do you remember how old you were?
I was 16 at the time.
You were 16.
Yeah.
And in school, and how did you handle that? So
Yeah.
you get beat, you're unrecognizable.
Yeah.
You decide I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
You make a call. Who did you call?
So it was like close to midnight whenever I got abused really bad. And I ran the streets of San Jose to my only friend that I like knew at the time that would be available. And I just ran as fast as I could after all of that happened. And I showed up on her doorstep and I looked unrecognizable, and she was like, oh my gosh. And then they like let me inside, and then they're like, you have to say something. And so they encouraged me to say something. And so, yeah, I you know, made the police report. Next day, officially, completely taken away. It's like a rug was pulled from underneath my feet. And it's like everything I knew was like, no more. Like, that doesn't exist. You can't go home. Legally, you can't, you know? And so, yeah, that's how it kind of happened. And then after that, I was still in high school at the time, but the thing is no one knew what I was going through. And there was so much petty drama, as all of you in this room could know and remember high school. There's so many just little things, petty drama. And so I made the executive decision to say, you know what? I'm going to lock myself in this room and complete my high school education.
Mm.
And so for 3 months, well, I actually had a goal in mind. And the thing is you can do something, but do you have like a target? Are you aimed towards like this target? Like I have this goal and I'm gonna meet it regardless. So, you know, I was taken away into the foster system, and then my social worker, she told me, she's like, you know, we can help you with college and all that. And so that was like a green light in my mind. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I never heard of college. And with my parents, with my mom, we never spoke of college because she always told me she couldn't afford it.
Mm.
But the moment I was completely out of her care and out of her care, I end up just using education. Like I looked at education like my golden ticket. Like this is what's going to help me. You know, this is what's going to provide for me at the end of the day. Cuz I'm helpless right now. I'm like I don't even have a say in where I end up where I sleep.
How did you know to put your faith in education as your kind of lever?
Well, at the time there was no good things going right. Like every little thing was crumbling, and the only thing that wasn't crumbling was my education. That was the only opportunity I had at the time. That's the only thing that kept me going in a really low and dark point in my life. And whenever they told me like you have an opportunity to proceed and pursue your education, I did that. And I was like, you know, and so I locked myself in the room for 3 months, and I had a goal. San Jose City College was starting their like spring semester in January, and so I was like, I have to finish by then. I'm enrolling by then. I'm done with high school. And so yeah, I got my high school diploma at the age of 16. 2 days later, I was walking on campus at San Jose City College, enrolled in my first couple classes.
Wow.
And that's how the whole journey kind of just started.
Yeah, let's clap it up for that. It's incredible the grit that you have to have at, you know, for me, education, and I know for you too, which we'll hear about in a few minutes, education was the lever for me. And I don't know how I knew. I think part of it was I was just tired of being at home. You know, I moved around a lot and I really didn't like being at home like that. So I would just stay at school and do all the extracurriculars. And I, you know, made friends with my teachers, right? And so that kept, I began to enjoy it, right? And because of that, it opened up like a wealth of opportunities. So for you, you didn't have the best experience in high school as a student, and yet you still saw education as the lever to pursue it early in college, which is incredible. Can you talk about that experience, navigating that, making that transition to college as a 16-year-old?
Yeah. So the reason why I wanted to be in college so bad was because in high school, you have to go. You don't have a choice. But in college, you have a choice. Do you want to pursue college? You know? And so everyone on that campus made the decision, the executive decision for themselves to be there. And I wanted to be in a place where people wanted to be, not where they're forced to be. That's why there's so much drama in high school, because half the people don't even want to be there. They're being forced, you know? And it's so different whenever you're on campus at college. People are pursuing their education because they want to. Not even education. People are in that environment, period, because they want to be. And it makes the world of a difference. Even the atmosphere, you know, the interactions that's why it's different. But whenever I was navigating college, when I was 16 years old, I really owe a lot of credit to my social worker, because at the time, you know, that first day that I walked on campus at San Jose City College, she was with me. And she, you know, I almost had this like red carpet experience where she took me straight to the right people, and she's like, this is Teresa, you know, like you're gonna get to know her. And then I was like, oh, okay. And so like she showed me all the ropes. She even like filled out my financial aid application, which I didn't even know how to like touch, or I was like, I don't know what that is. Some lady filled it out for me.
Right.
So yeah, she really held my hand through that process. She saw the hunger and she met me where I was at. And so, yeah, I honestly, obviously, whenever you graduate high school at a younger age, you're not placed in like these extremely advanced classes. You have to start at that like ground level kind of. And so, yeah, that was my experience with like the beginning stages of being on campus as such a young baby. And I know, because it's like when you're 18, it's like, at the age of 18, most people start college, but I felt like a baby.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was super young, you know, like I should be in high school right now. I should be a sophomore. And I'm
Yeah.
like on campus, you know. Yeah.
Just doing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you finish your high school early, you go to college. What was happening in your family dynamic? Did you ever get a chance to move back with your family? Did you just stay? Did you just age out of foster care? What was the relationship between you, your twin sister, your siblings?
Whenever I was taken away into the foster care, I was actually separated from my twin sister for like a whole year, which sucked. It like hurt me really bad because that's like half of me, you know? That's like my other half. And I was separated from her. I wasn't at the same school as her. We weren't completely different. We were on completely different sides of, you know, town. And so it was hard. With my parents, I legally couldn't see them. I couldn't even see my grandma. I couldn't even see relatives because the way the system saw it was if your father can pop up there, you can't be there. And if you do end up there and we find out, the adults in that house are going to be held accountable. And my, you know, like my mom, if I were to go and see her in the midst of this, like she could go to jail. So I was pretty separated. And at the time, I was also really hurt from what happened, you know? Like I don't have the same perspective that I do today. And so I held a grudge against my parents. Like I was so angry because I was in such a terrible situation. Like that, like I said, it was one of the lowest points in my life. Like if I look back and if I just close my eyes and if I just can think, when's the lowest point of your life? When was the darkest point in your life? I think of that time. Because I was a baby. I was like 16. I didn't really know any better. And I was like on the streets. And it was something that I couldn't help. Like anywhere I wanted to get, I had to take a bus to. You know? Like I had no adults in my life. The only adults in my life were like my social worker that could legally be around me. But yeah, that was kind of...
So you felt isolated as a foster youth, like you were really out in the wind.
Yeah. And like I remember like kind of going into like these rooms with, I don't even know who they are, what they would be considered, but they always made decisions on where I'd sleep that night. And I was so angry at the world. I was so angry because I'd look at the guy making the decision and I'd be like, you get to go home to your kids. You get to sleep in your bed tonight. I'm going to a random place. Like I'm going where you send me.
Yeah.
I don't even have a say. Like my voice was completely silent. Anything I wanted, you know? And so yeah, it was a really painful time in my life. And there was nothing, as you can imagine from what I've said thus far, there was nothing going my way. The only thing that was going my way was the opportunity to pursue my education. So that was, yeah.
How did you reconcile the respect that like your dad gets in the world as like, you know, a top gang member, somebody who's very well known in the community? How did you reconcile his positionality and then your circumstance at the time? Did you ever think about that at all?
Yeah. I to all the people that like, you know, respected him, I was like, you don't know anything. Like, I just thought they were like all on one. I was like, you don't know anything, you know, like you're over here praising him, but I'm right here in this situation. So yeah, I was, like I said, I held a grudge against them. I even at one point at the beginning of my stay in foster care, because I ended up aging out. No one ever came for me. There was no one that came and rescued me. I had to age out of that. So yeah, I don't know,
Yeah, let's go ahead and clap it up for Teresa, man. It's not easy. You know, Dante is in the audience as well. He is a former foster youth. Raise your hand, Dante, so people can see you with that. He's like, why are you doing this to me?
funny.
I do this to him all the time. But I have to because, you know, your role in this community is so important and so powerful. But Dante, we had the opportunity this time last year. We sat down with Dante and Lupe, who's another board member at Pivotal, and he talks about Dante currently is the founder of Raising the Bar, Raising RAZING. So he provides housing to emancipated foster youth here in Santa Clara County now. And if you knew his story, you would know how major that is. Yes, you can clap it up for that. So, and Mac was here earlier, and we were talking. He's in the back of the room. Mac is just talked about all the work that he's doing as a former foster youth, giving back and providing opportunities for people to go to school and scholarships and all the things. And I think about something that Dante says all the time, especially working with young people now, right? He says, you know, if you talk to foster youth in our county, across Santa Clara County, across the Bay Area, across the country, the number one thing that they will tell you is nobody ever listens to us. They do not listen. So if you find a young person that's in that system, even the audacity of saying, hey, this is what I want to do, it's almost like not a thing in your own life, right? And so if you imagine a kid having to navigate that system. For myself, I felt ping-ponged as a kid. I'm like, all right, so we here now. This supposed to be temporary housing turned into 3 months, 3 months turned into a year. I'm like, where is y'all taking me back soon? You know, and like, but that's the story, right? It's like you never really know. You don't have any agency over your own life. And anybody, how many parents do we have in here? Raise your hand if you got some kids. Oh, it's a whole lot of parents in here, right? You imagine when you have your baby, you think about all the things that you want for that person to thrive, to be better than you, to go in the world, to be safe, to feel like they can take advantage of every opportunity that they deserve and require, right? And for foster youth, that, first of all, that bubble of safety and care is not there. But also I was saying earlier, the privilege to dream just suddenly becomes, it just dissipates, right? Because that young person has to navigate that system without that safety bubble. And so what happens when you navigate the world as a young person without that safety bubble is your sense of confidence, sense of self-worth, sense of self-esteem, sense of self-love, sense of all the things that you believe you deserve, it starts to dissipate, right? It starts to erode, right? And then we look at people and how they cope in their adult lives when they struggle, and it's like, oh, lock them up, throw medication at them. When it's like, no, this is a young person whose sense of self has eroded for a whole bunch of conditions that was not their fault to begin with, right? And so I think what you're highlighting is so important, and you found, even in the circumstance that you were in, you found a way to create a plan for yourself, right? Like, school starts on this date, this is done by here. I'm sticking in my room until 3. And to think about the sheer determination that a teenager would have to make those kinds of decisions is incredible. So yeah, clap it up. And we're gonna get back to some of, because mental health has been the theme of the day, so we're gonna get back to some of that. I wanna bring you in on this, Marilyn. Can you tell us a little bit about, because you spent a shorter period in foster care. So this is somebody who was in foster care and aged out, is what we would call it. You age out. Like, I aged out. Some people emancipate early. And for you, you were in care for a short window of time. You reintegrated with your family. Talk to me about what you remember about your experience and how you ended up in care.
Yeah, so the way I explain my childhood now is like, childhood is the worst hood I've ever lived in. And I say that kind of joking, but I would say I didn't know that when I was a child. It's only upon reflecting and really confronting all of the experiences that I had that I'm like, wow, that was really fucked up. And I think it was a lot of layers. It was the layer of like immigration, of poverty, of racism, and then of like within our family dynamics, abuse. And so my earliest memories of my childhood are actually at the Days Inn Hotel in Glendale. If y'all ever been to Porto's in Glendale, it's like very close by. And for me at that time, I was like having a blast in the hotel. Like, you get Cartoon Network, you get a pool. My school was right across the street, and so for me, that was my experience. And I think like the innocence of any kid, you're gonna find joy in whatever is in front of you. And so I also have a twin sister and an older brother and a younger sister as well. And so it was a family of 6 of us living in not a 2-bedroom, but a 2-bed hotel room. And so, there was, I think, a lot of just no privacy, a lot of like very much in each other's space. And I remember like my mom trying to make the most of having no stove and really just having like a hot plate and using the tub as a sink, you know, to wash dishes for a family of 6. And I think I'm grateful for that experience in that it showed me that you could do a lot with a little. And I think that's one of the lessons that I take from growing up in a hotel for a long time. I ended up moving, or my family ended up moving out of the hotel into our first home that we were renting. But we ended up going back into the hotel because of my dad's gambling issues, and eventually went from Glendale to Pasadena. I would say that's kind of where like the abuse for me started. And I didn't enter the system until I was around 11 or 12. But looking back, there were a lot of good reasons for me to have entered the system a lot earlier. I did experience childhood sexual abuse, as well as physical abuse and emotional abuse. And those are parts that, like, you know, really suck to acknowledge, but I think they are important in being able to really understand like the kind of resilience that foster care youth have and the kind of supports that foster care youth might need in order to really self-actualize. And so I would say that it was my parents' divorce that really kind of triggered ultimately my placement and my siblings' placement in foster care. My parents started getting divorced when I was in 6th grade, and their divorce was one of the worst divorces in our county. Unfortunately, that's like not the kind of compliment you want to get from judges that oversee your cases and lawyers saying, wow, I've never seen anything like this. And it's like for all the wrong reasons. But their divorce had a lot of fighting, as you can imagine. And there were a lot of police phone calls made. I remember in a period of maybe like 2 to 3 months, there were over 50 phone calls made to the police. And that was only at one of my parents' residences. So, you know, kind of doing the math, we had police over at our house 2 to 3 times a week, sometimes twice in one day. And there was just a lot of chaos. There was a lot of allegations, child abuse allegations that were made. And so that ultimately is the reason why we were placed in foster care. And, you know, I really appreciate what you said earlier. Like, there's certain things that kind of unites foster youth, but really everyone has their own journey through it in terms of when they enter the system, how long, different places, you know, that they lived while they were in the system, and then, of course, what happens afterwards. And I think the same can be said for my family. And each of my siblings and I had drastically different experiences, even though we were from the same family, even though we had a twin, you know. My twin and I were also eventually split up, and she was like in a completely different district for some time. We went to different schools for some time, and it really broke our family apart in a physical way that, you know, was not like that before.
Yeah. You both bring up your twin sisters. I have not a twin sister, but I do have a little sister who thinks she's my twin sister. She's right here. Walina, raise your hand. Everybody can see you. That's my little sister, y'all. Okay. And in the earlier conversation, I was talking about the literal day that I was separated from my siblings. Like, I remember the day, I remember the scene, I remember the street, I remember the house, I remember literally probably everything but the car. That's because I was in it, driving off, right?
Yeah.
But that scene in my head is like, it's heavy. So can you all talk to the people in this, like, even when I think about it now, it's probably one of the, like, I try not to think about it, right? Because I grew up with my siblings, you know, we were all pretty close. And so I'm wondering if you can just give people in the room a sense of what that's like being separated, not just from your siblings, but you both have twin sisters. What is that experience like, that separation?
Yeah. The first thing that I feel even in my body is just like a bunch of anxiety. I remember we were in children's court, and there was kind of like a rumor floating around of like, yeah, you might not be going home today.
Wow.
And that was like the first time that it really sunk in that like this could be a day that really changes my life. And I just remember not necessarily like having so many questions, like it wasn't so much like an intellectual experience as in like an emotional and physical one of like just feeling really nervous and feeling like very uncertain of what was going to happen. And when I think back to like that day, I can only remember like being in the lobby area for children's court, and we had been there like the whole day. And I just remember feeling like something was wrong because our case was taking so long. And we like sat there, saw like a bunch of kids, families come and go until we were like really one of the last people in that lobby. And I'm like, yeah, like something's up. And I think that's kind of like all I remember. I think the rest I kind of suppressed, to be honest. But the like next kind of big moment that I remember of like being like, oh yeah, like I'm in this system now is actually telling one of my teachers. Her name was or is Miss Thalman, and she was my English teacher. And I knew that being in foster care was like a big deal because everything about my life changed from one day to the next. And I also remember feeling like, oh, this is a big deal because it was something that I could not really talk about. Like something about my 11, 12-year-old self knew like, yeah, like I don't really have the words to describe this experience, but I know that it's like really sad and it makes me want to not talk about it. And there's like a lot of shame attached to it for whatever reason. But my twin sister and I, we like stayed after class, and I feel like Miss Thalman could kind of tell something was up, and she's like, y'all ladies okay? You know, like, do you want to talk about something? And I just remember wanting to cry and, you know, feeling like I had like a huge frog in my throat. And I was like, oh, like my twin and I were in foster care now. And I don't know if my teacher actually knew what exactly that meant. I didn't really know what that meant exactly, other than like I wake up in a different bed, I wake up in a different house, in a different room, in a different neighborhood. You know, like I'm not with my parents anymore. And um, it was hard to tell people, adults in my life at that time, what it was and what it meant. I just knew that it was a big deal. And like the only other experience that I really had to compare it to was when